All right, everyone, welcome back. Today we're talking about navigation without GPS, the great token wars of the 1980s, and that time Chris got a bee on his buzzer.
So I get a call from my cousin, who actually, and the call was about this podcast. He's on the East Coast and just wanted to let me know he'd been listening.
Oh,
and
right on. That's awesome.
He's literally a couple months older than you and I, so fits right into our demographic, our Gen X demographic. And one of the things he brought up was a T-shirt that he had gotten as a gift, and which basically the T-shirt said, Gen X, raised on neglect and hose water. To which I'm thinking,
Nice.
Yeah, that about sums it up, right? I mean,
that's awesome. Yeah.
If you're going to fit it on a T-shirt, it's not like you've got multiple paragraphs to deal with, right? So let's get really pithy and put it into a compound sentence or two, and there you go, right? And so after, it's like the more I thought about it, the more obsessed I became with that. Going, yep, yeah, because again, like we right, you and I both we appreciate that pithy phrase. So, but it really after that part wore off, it's just like, yep, accurate, relatable, 100% true. And I started thinking about the neglect part. First of all, we were like, most of us, a lot of us were latchkey kids, right? Before there was even a term for it, right? All of a sudden, that was a time period where most families, two working parents, kids coming home to an empty house after school, which I loved that. I thought it was it didn't bother me a bit, right? To this day, my 87-year-old mother feels guilt. If I bring it up, she feels guilty about it. She thinks that, and possibly maybe I would have been like a, Nobel Prize winning astrophysicist if somehow she had been around, if I wasn't a, quote unquote latchkey kid, even though they didn't call us latchkey kids then. Right. So, but again, I loved it. I loved the freedom, the independence. At the time, we never really thought about it as being neglect. It was just our lives. Right. And I think if you sort of balance it against kids today that, as parents, your kids are older than mine, but I'm assuming you and your wife bent over backwards to try to make sure, your kids were watched over, taken care of, had rights, had stuff to do during summer, after school, everything else. The last thing you would have done was just like, well, they got a key, they can go home and eat ice cream and watch Huckleberry Hound, which is what I did, right? After, from a pretty early age. It was just my life. I took my shoes off and put my feet on the couch. I didn't care, right? I, again, thought it was cool. But nothing really sort of jumps up more now as it's summertime. And I was thinking about, because then we really sort of ratcheted up that, what you could refer to as neglect, or it's just like those sort of unsupervised days, which, man, waking up to an empty house, which again, parents are off to work, which again, it was like, this is really cool. So I'm going to have 5 bowls of Cheerios and then figure out, and hopefully, and I don't know, we have to use the phone or something to figure out what I was going to do with my friends, right? Because what we did with our friends, because we certainly didn't just, text or send any instant messages or anything through Instagram, right? Obviously, none of that was possible. So we had to pick up the phone and maybe figure something out. But it just really sort of resonated on with me, because was it neglect? Were we unsupervised? Did the parents not care what we were doing? Yeah, it's not that they didn't care, but they didn't really have a choice. And at the same time, they didn't have the mechanism, which I think we've kind of touched on before, to even know what we were doing, right? They had to go on faith. If we weren't in the house, that we weren't out literally starting fires or committing crimes or doing anything else or hurting ourselves. It was just completely like, you're on your own. So again, if you want to call it neglect, sure. Today would probably be considered that. And then at the same time, nothing like a hot day than that cool, crisp water coming out of that garden hose. If you were out playing in the neighborhood, playing with your friends, and you had, it's like we're not carrying around a gallon of water, like our kids do today. We don't have easy access to plastic water bottles and everything else. It's like, give me a garden hose, turn that thing on, and it's going to feel a little brassy, a little metallic, but it's going to quench my thirst, and then I'm going to go on my way. Right. So it was just like, and that to me sort of summed up what we did during the summers, right? Just give me what I need quickly, and I'm on my way, and don't worry about anything else.
Well, I mean, think about it both ways. Anybody can use the word neglect, but at the same time, to your point, nowadays you can double check on people. You can text them, you can look at their social media. You can obviously call them instantly, and they should be getting back to you right away. Back then, of course, as we've said a million times, if you made a quick phone call to check in on your kid and he wasn't by the phone, that's it. There's nothing else to be done, right? Other than if you're really worried, calling every other person you think might somehow miraculously be within proximity of that person that's now missing or you're worried about. And even those people have to be in proximity of a thing that is hanging on a wall or sitting on a kitchen counter. No one's carrying it in their pocket, right? So to a large extent, it wasn't really even neglect. It was just logistics, right? There was no other way to get a hold of people. And to your point, most of the time you had two working parents, and a lot of people came from the usual percentage of maybe broken homes or tough divorces or things like that. But a lot of us, me included, I had the same parents that you did in terms of letting me have complete free run and disappearing in the morning and coming back by sundown. And they were great parents and really supportive, and it never felt like neglect. But that's the absolute truth of it, man. You would just disappear. And especially in summertime, you didn't even have to think about it. You just knew that it's time to go outside and catch up with any number of my subgroups of friends to go do any number of things, right? And if they didn't answer the phone, no problem. What was the other way that we knew when someone was at the house, Chris? We would just stroll up to the house on our bike or skateboard, and you can see whose bikes are out in front, right? That tells you what's going on. Well, look at that. Right. There's 6 of my friends' bikes all clumped up in a giant pile out in front of, Bill Bender's house or Sean Liberton's house or, wherever we're headed to. And damn, thanks for the invite, assholes. And then you just walk up and knock on the door, and you hope that they're not pissed at you that day about some stupid thing you did. Right. Right.
Well, it was just all proximity too, right? So that if you were on the outskirts, right, if you had a couple of friends that lived a little bit closer, that was just easy because they were, you didn't answer the phone. Again, I think I was just thinking about too is like even right now, it's to check on your kid. God forbid, like you could see what your kid's doing on camera, right? In a lot of these houses, right? If somebody's coming and going, and like, Jesus, I'm glad we didn't have any cameras watching what we were doing at that time period. But at the same time, even now, I'm still waiting on my jetpack, right? And you're telling me that there are flying cars available to me that I don't want. But now we almost have like what was it what was it called, a homing device in science fiction? It's like you've got that little thing you've got that on your kid's phone, so you know exactly where your kid is. And it's like, well, it looks like you're at Roberto's, right? So I'm assuming you're having a burrito with your friends, right? Or you're at the beach or you're wherever. Whereas again, with our unfettered, limitless freedom, at least until our parents came home, right? So that made summer, I thought it was great. Never would have thought it was neglect. Like you said, it was just circumstances. It was just logistics. But at the same time, it's staggering to think that you would even think about that now, right? Parents, it would be considered neglect. It's like, what? You're leaving your kid at home to their own devices and you're not checking in on them and you have no idea where they are or what they're doing or who they're with. It's like, you're probably going to get, I don't know, reported to, Child Protective Services or something like that if your kids are young enough. And like I said, that was just like the same time. And I'm guessing, and again, as your kids are older than mine, like I remember the time when my oldest, when it became, again, these moms, my wife and some of the other moms are talking about, they're all trying to coordinate summer, what they're going to do during the summer, right? And they had spreadsheets at Google Docs of like, well, I'm putting my kid into this camp. Oh, I want to get him in that camp. So there's this whole sort of run up now where, what is your kid going to do this summer? I guarantee our parents never batted an eye having any kind of conversation going, what are our kids going to do this summer? It's like, yeah, they'll figure it out. And again, as long as they don't burn anything down or break any laws or hurt anybody or themselves, like the world was your blank canvas of what you wanted to do or what you could do.
What are my kids going to do this summer? Dude, most parents didn't even give that a thought. They didn't even ask that question in their mind. For them, it was literally the transition between summer and the school year was no different because they still had to report to work the next day. So it was just,
Right.
just go do your thing. And, there's stuff in the refrigerator, and grab an Otter Pop, get a space food stick, go help yourself to some Life cereal and pour some syrup on it. Enjoy your day, right? Just be back, before I turn on the porch lights outside, and you're good to go. And you're right. I mean, we just went from hose water to hose water. We've talked about this before. I loved earlier that you were talking about cool, crisp hose water. I don't know what hose water you were drinking from. It was always 7,000 degrees and tasted like rubber.
Sometimes it was cold. I don't know how, right? It didn't make any sense. Maybe it was just cool in the sense because you were thirsty and it was cooler. If it was 90 degrees and the water was 80 degrees, then it's still cooler. But I'm just saying it was refreshing. Maybe it wasn't cool, but maybe I'll amend that. It was refreshing to drink out of that hose. And why? Because you could just keep going. Right? You didn't have to stop anywhere. You didn't have to, like I said, let me go find my water bottle, or I got to run home and stay hydrated. Again, we've had this conversation before. It's like we went on limited hydration and somehow we're all still alive, right? Nobody dried up and nobody collapsed into a heap because they were dehydrated, or didn't have enough sunscreen, although we do have our sunscreen stories, right? So that to me, again, it just didn't, and like I said, our parents didn't leave the house saying, okay, make sure you drink enough, make sure you put on your sunscreen, make sure you're checking, text me if you're going here and there. I mean, obviously none of those things even occurred. I didn't have the technology for some of them, but we didn't have the state of mind.
Well, one of the main reasons that we didn't care too much about the flavor or the temperature of the hose water was because, to the point we made earlier, we waited until we were almost dead from thirst before we actually went for the hose water. So at that point, it was you sitting there for about what felt like 15 minutes, just rehydrating your entire body like a Popeye cartoon, right? Where you're just shoving the hose down your throat and trying to rehydrate your entire body, which was about 2 seconds away from full systematic collapse from just an utter lack of hydration, right? All of us were almost at critical failure at all times. And then you would just fill up on that sweet rubber water and then go back to whatever crazy thing you were doing and just sweat profusely again. So that was the basic way to do it. Chris and I think you were talking about this with me a little while ago, that one of the most memorable summers, for me anyway, and I think this was a pretty memorable one for you, was I think it would be the summer of 1980, right? So you and I, if I'm not mistaken, we would both have been 14 years old, which to me, as I recall back in the day, was my perfect age. Even at the time, back then, I thought to myself, I have a feeling it's just not going to get any better than this. This could be my year when I turned 14 and just experienced life as a 14-year-old. You're old enough now that you're developing a sense of humor. You're starting to see the world for kind of what it really is. You can see what adult life would be like. But nobody expects anything of you, right? You're still young enough that you have pretty much zero responsibilities and you can still enjoy life for another few years before, here comes adulthood, so to speak. Do you remember this summer of 1980?
Yeah, when you talk about 1980, yeah, absolutely. Because we were going to be ninth graders, which again, for those of us, where we went to what was called junior high, and it was 7th, 8th, and ninth grade with just 3 years for high school. And obviously, so we were going to be the ninth graders. We were going to be top of the heap. So that was kind of like cool in that regard too. So yeah, there was a certain amount of anticipation in that summer. But for me, I remember very distinctly about summer of 1980 in the second to the last game of the year, as I played Navajo's Senior League, and we had a terrible team that year. So I think we ended up winning 3 games, and we won one, when I had to miss because of my confirmation. And then we won the last game of the season, which I also did not play in because in the second to last game, I broke my wrist. Okay, got hit by a pitch, broke my wrist, which meant, okay, school had just gotten out like 2 or 3 days before, right? And break my wrist, to the ER, end up in a cast all the way up to my, from past my elbow to the top of my shoulder for 6 weeks or so. So pretty much half of the summer spent in a cast. And again, I think we're dating ourselves now when we talk about, I don't remember the last time I saw somebody in a cast, at least traditionally the way that they made casts when we were a kid. I think they're much more, there are a lot of other options in casts, and they use fiberglass. They don't put this big hunk of plaster that your friends all come and sign with like a magic marker or something like that. I do remember my friend Jonathan drawing this very intricate Rush logo. Shout out to Jonathan if you're listening. But essentially, so there's nothing like the anticipation of summer of like, I'm going to sleep in, I'm going to go swimming, we're going to go to the beach, we're going to do all of those things, we're going to run around, we're going to go play baseball, we're going to jump on our bikes and ride a family fun center, all of these things that we're planning for the summer. And boom, here I am in a cast for the first 6 weeks, which pretty much knocked me out of all of the fun stuff for half of the summer.
I guess the question that every guy listening to this has for you, which wrist was it, Chris?
It was my right wrist.
Oh, no, not and you're right-handed?
And I was right-handed.
See, that can put a real damper in a lot of the activities that kids at that age get into. So I'm very sorry to hear that was hindered, but I'll bet you by the end of that summer, you were getting pretty good with your left hand. Am I wrong?
Not as good as I would have liked, unfortunately, but probably better than normally. But again, it ruled out pretty much everything because why? Because except for when, and again, we had talked about this on past episodes about, except for maybe if we're hanging around somebody's house and we're watching the Twilight Zone from 12 to 12:30 and 12:30 to 1 on Channel 5, everything we did was pretty active, right? And where now a kid breaks something, it's like, oh no. So again, they've got to, play video games with the other hand, or they're going to just, be posting on social media with their other hand. They weren't out essentially, like I said, and yes, not that the kids today aren't as active and aren't doing the things, but not like we were. Everything is structured now. It's travel sports and it's classes and everything else. Where us, it was just like you wake up and it's just like, what are we doing today? It's like, well, I got this big L-shaped hunk of plaster on my body. That's what I'm doing. So.
Well, and honestly, back then, everybody, it was a big deal to not have access to one of your wrists or arms. Certainly a leg was a real critical one too. But hey, at least if you broke your leg, you can prop yourself up at Steve's Arcade or Starcade back in the day and still have fun during the classic token wars that were taking place at around that time, right? Chris and I were witness to one of the most epic token battles that ever took place between rival owners of video arcades. It used to be you would get for $1, 4 tokens, right? That means it would cost you 25 whole cents to play something. Then, if it was a real generous arcade, 6 tokens for $1. Well, in the summer of 1980, as I recall, they went crazy, right? These two arcade owners that were near each other just went apeshit. Pretty soon, Chris, it was 8 tokens for $1, 12 tokens to $1. One morning, I woke up to the news, 14 tokens for $1, right?
Wow.
My God in heaven, that meant you never had to leave the arcade. If you had, God forbid, $6 or $7 in your pocket, you could be there all day, right? Now, poor Chris, without the use of his right arm, I would argue that is one of the things you just can't do. There's really almost no way to play video games with just one hand. You've got to be really good. You might be able to Asteroids your way into a little bit of a half game, but you're not going to be doing Missile Command, pal. Don't even think you're going to be doing Tank Battle. And I'm sorry, but Pinball ain't going to happen with one hand, so good luck with that.
No, because you had to have, well, not only did you have to have your good wrist for the joystick and you had the buttons. So even if it was just one game, and I can't think of any game where you just needed a joystick. Outside of Pacman. Okay, Pacman, all you really needed was the one. But everything else was all about, all the, smacking that button with the other hand. So no, absolutely. So that was at the time, that broken wrist in 1980 was pretty much the worst thing that had ever happened to me. Right. And again, the timing of it, it couldn't happen in the middle of the school year where possibly I could have gotten out of PE and, not had to bring my gym clothes and do all that horrific stuff that we talked about. 6 weeks of that from November, December would have been pretty cool. Right. It would have just gotten me a little bit of sympathy and a little extra attention, and that's fine. But at the start of summer, again, it was the worst thing that ever happened to me. So,
yeah. Well, Chris, that entire summer, you weren't able to smack that button. That is tragic.
My joystick did not get the attention it deserved.
On the other side of things, and I guess I'm going to be that guy. This was the greatest school year of my life, and it shouldn't have been, right? Because Chris and I went to a junior high. We've mentioned this before. That was kind of weird and oppressive. It just had a dark vibe to it in terms of day in and day out, feeling just kind of I really don't want to go to school. Lots of bullies, not even for someone. Chris and I weren't, I think I'm speaking for us pretty well here. We weren't seen as bully targets necessarily. I mentioned this before. I personally got into a lot of fights that were all my fault, but just in general, this school had just kind of a tough vibe to it, right? It wasn't a happy place to go to school. But this one year, Chris, I don't know if I've ever told you this story. I was in a biology class at the beginning of the year, and it was overcrowded. They had too many people. And so they said to me and 3 other guys at the end of the alphabet, right, and the T's and the V's, you guys have to make a decision, man. You can go to a PE class or you can go to drama. And Chris, I don't know what drove me to drama. I know Chris has his theories as to what drove me to drama, right? Maybe it's my flamboyant nature. I don't know what it is, but I somehow said, all right, give me the drama class. Let's see how this goes. And I did not want to go. The day that I showed up to that drama class, Chris, guess what I found in that class? I found nine girls and me and the teacher. And the teacher was the coolest teacher ever. She was the hip drama teacher that you see in every cliche John Hughes high school movie, where she kind of we all got the sense that she smoked weed, and was super, super cool. Every girl in this class was actually really cute. These were all kind of the edgy, cool girls at the school. And man, within minutes, I'm oh shit, this is going to be really good. This is awesome. All I had to do was just a minimal amount of effort to get everyone to go, wow, Jeff, that's amazing. Oh my gosh, that was so funny. Oh, that little skit that you just did is incredible. Next thing I know, Chris, me, kind of shy, introverted. I know it sounds crazy. If maybe you know me now, it doesn't sound like I'm an introverted person, but back then I was, nerdy, dorky. I'm still nerdy and dorky, for God's sake, if you listen to the last episode. But all of a sudden, guys, I had clout. And these were the girls that were now talking to other girls that were on the inside, right? The rocker chicks, the ones that were a little bit edgier, more sardonic and deep, and maybe the ones that had access to the marijuana and other things, right? Next thing I know, Chris, I'm being invited to parties, and I'm showing up at parties, and I remember this one 8th grade party where I was practically the only guy there, and I was literally being passed around like a party favor between all these different girls. And I thought, what happened? How did I get to this? This is not my, I almost felt like David Byrne in, Stop Making Sense,
this
right?
This is not my beautiful life.
Yeah, right, exactly. So anyway, all I can say is I took a weird left turn, and man, did that turn out to be a smart move on my part.
So what you're saying is that you were the embodiment of, what is it, that phrase that in the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is king, basically. So you were, or something like that, right? Because you were the only guy which I didn't even know this was happening at Pershing. I didn't know that was even a possibility. I'm guessing that super cool teacher, she was not old enough to be your mom, right? She was probably a year or two, right? She was probably 22 or 24 years old, maybe, or
Yeah.
something like that.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
she was fresh out of school, right? So
Oh,
she's still trying to
completely.
be
Yeah.
hip and cool and happy with the kids. Um, that's amazing to me in that regard because, um, again, still kind of stunned that to not, but I understand if you didn't want to take PE. Although I don't know why you weren't already taking PE. Would you have had two PE classes anyway?
You could have done some extracurricular. I don't know what the deal was. Maybe I would have been, to your point, Chris, in that episode we did about 6 or 7 episodes ago when we were talking about the showers, right? And the guy
Mm-hmm.
that would hand out towels. I don't know. Maybe I was going to be the towel monitor. Maybe I would have been a ball monitor. I have no idea. But what I ended up as was way better than what I ever thought I could have achieved as a nerdy 8th grader. So
Did was that a temporary? Was that like a life changing event? Is that something that, like, because now it's like, okay, because you've always had this, and also I should have given you a nice pull just for your use of the word sardonic. We don't usually use nice pulls on vocabulary, but I think that's definitely the first
yeah,
time I've heard sardonic on this podcast. But
thank you.
did
Thank
it,
you.
because again, there's always that thing where it's like, and again, obviously you have a background in doing stand up, but probably there was some point in time where you made people laugh, right? And I could probably think of times you made me laugh way back when. So you're making
Yeah.
people laugh, and it's like, and you get the enjoyment out of it. And it's kind of like, and you kind of go for that again. I can remember doing that in specific classes as well. It's like, oh yeah, there's some, low hanging fruit in this class. It's like, I will go for the cheap laugh just to get the attention and deflect from the fact that this class or this teacher kind of suck. But in a sense, so was that a tipping point for you? Was it 14-year-old Jeff going, hey, this is, I have this facet of my personality that I've never really tapped into. And this is something, I'm trying something different. And I'm not, out there struggling on the little league team for, the Navajo Road Taco Bell, in the sense that
So true.
it was like a purpose, right? Where it's just like, hey, and the timing was perfect, right? 14 years old, you probably don't get much more. I mean, that's definitely a developmental phase physically, and emotionally and intellectually. And it was just like, had you chosen PE, what would have happened? I can think of a lot of things that wouldn't have happened, right? Based on your experience.
Yeah, I peaked very quickly in the athletic world, right? I was in the same baseball, basic leagues, little league that you were in, different league. But, I had my moment in the sun when I was 12 years old, and they referred to me as, get this, Chris, Thundering Phil, right? Because, I actually could, God willing, hit the ball. I was like a pretty good hitter. That was right around the time, too, that my eyes started to get not so good. And then lo and behold, I started to really suck. By the time I got a little further in Little League, I was the worst, right? The kind of guy that you just don't want on the team, can't hit anything.
Right.
And please, Jeff, do us all a favor and leave the sport of baseball to the people who care about it and want to succeed. As we talked about many times, Eric Karros and other major league most valuable players who came from our little league and went on to superstardom, but not me, sir. But yes, to your point, it was a huge turning point because I learned in that drama class that just giving even a little bit of effort could pay off big time in terms of people laughing and appreciating what you did. And there was a big difference between being told, hey, you're a funny guy, versus actually being able to get in front of an audience, have people look at you, and then from 0 to 60 somehow make them laugh. And I realized that, oh man, these are two very different things. And that's why I think, Chris, a lot of folks are told, hey man, you're really funny, you should go be a comic. And they learn later the hard way, shit, I suck. Once I get on stage, it's not so funny. So sorry, long story short was, yes, it was super, super cool. It was pretty life-changing. Later on, I got to be in the school play. I didn't have a big part, but my part happened to be one of the funny moments in the play. So when I came on stage, huge laughter, and you would get 600 kids in the audience, all screaming with laughter, right? And yeah, totally. That was an addiction that I don't think I've ever to this day gotten over, right? And I do think it was life changing. I think that definitely gave me the confidence later on to get on stage other places and give it a try. Right. Yeah, there you go.
It's inspiring in that regard, because again, you don't think of things like that. Again, the randomness of it, to the point of like, yeah, what if it had been you had a choice between drama and, I don't know, wood shop? We think, I'll take wood shop. Again, would you become a carpenter? Probably not.
No,
You probably,
no,
I'm
no.
guessing, because I think this stuff bubbles up anyway, right? I think
Yeah,
if it didn't
sure.
manifest itself in that drama class, it probably would have come out at some point, maybe a little bit later, maybe it would have been several years later.
I sucked at wood shop just as bad as I sucked at metal shop, just as bad as I sucked at drafting, just as bad as I sucked at PE. So I knew pretty early on that doing things with my hands or in any sort of a coordinated way was not the thing for me, right? My son, my older son, always makes the joke, I'm not a physical boy, Dad. And the joke is obviously that he did not inherit any sort of athleticism from me. That is for sure. We're both in the same situation, right? We can technically throw a ball and catch a ball. I could probably hit a baseball without embarrassing myself, but that's about as far as it goes.
I mean, those shop classes. Okay, so that's a great point, because I think I can remember even then, and I don't know if it's still, although at some point, do they even offer them? I know that's the things that have been cut towards, the, years and years. Those are things like that go, even though trades are enormously important. But I can remember, to us, I don't think there necessarily was a stigma towards a shop class. And I think we all had eventually at some point, we had an elective where it's like, yes, yeah, you mentioned, it's like, I think I took 2 or 3 shop classes, I think. And it was like, I think it was metal shop, which had nothing to do with like listening to Led Zeppelin, which I think metal shop was like on the radio. I took electricity, and there's a couple interesting anecdotes about that. And I took graphic arts, which was probably the funnest one, right? Because you could kind of like, I'm going to make a t-shirt, or I'm going to make a logo and whatever. But the shop classes, and again, I think I took 3 in that 3-year period of junior high school. And there were the same guys for the most part in every one of those shop classes, right? And
Oh, yeah.
they took more than one shop class at a time, right? And they took multiple. And even then, I think they were probably pushed towards those, because those were the kids that already were identified as, well, maybe this kid is not college material, but so we're going to encourage them to go take a shop class, which is terrible in retrospect, right? But then the one thing that I do look at from those days were the teachers from the shop classes, where it's like, maybe getting back to that episode of Happy Days where all of a sudden the Fonz, because he's a mechanic, becomes like teaching auto shop, right? These guys were probably not on the level of the rest of our teachers in that regard. At the same time, going, I don't know, are they looked down on? Were they caught in between like academics and the real world? Like, if you're teaching auto shop, do your friends who are mechanics sort of make fun of you because you're in a school and you're teaching a bunch of kids instead of out there, fixing, Z28s? But it was definitely the shop classes
Wow.
themselves.
Z28s.
The shop classes, right, in themselves were like a subculture of school, right? Because,
Yeah.
and you're right, I'm right up there with you. It's like, when my dad was always ridiculously frustrated by my lack of, let's just say, skills with a hammer, or a wrench or a screwdriver or anything in between. It's like when I eventually grew up and got married and had my own first house, he very passive aggressively would, every time like birthday or Christmas, all of a sudden I'm getting like tools from him, like this is what he's trying to like, and I'm like, I don't even know what this is. Why are you buying me this tool? I'll never use it. Although I've had over time, it's like I've had my neighbors go, hey, can I borrow that Dremel tool? I'm like, sure, it's still in the box, go for it. But so
can I borrow that miter saw? You're like, if you need it, I don't know what it is, but okay,
right,
yeah, sure.
right. So I mean, so I definitely, but there were the kids, and maybe their dads made them do that, or maybe again it was just something that they picked up on. Maybe they didn't have the resources, right, that we did, even though we were all right neglected and drinking hose water. Um,
Chris, you have a lathe, right? Can I borrow your lathe? You're like, I'm sorry, what now? That thing in the side of your garage that cost $12,000. That's a lathe, Chris. Okay, I mean, if you want to borrow it, sure.
That's right. I'm making parts for an aircraft carrier on
That's
my
right.
lathe, right?
Yeah.
And that's see that, and again, that was it. I think great to that point. And again, this was almost in the same time period, right? That was one of the like dynamics, and if I remember correctly, in the Breakfast Club, where it was like the Judd Nelson character took shop classes. And so then the nerdy Anthony Michael Hall character was just like, there again, it was like, yeah, you took shop class because you thought it would be easy. And instead you got a B and it screwed up your whole GPA. Right. And I don't know if I ever thought a shop class was going to be easy, but I never thought it was going to be hard because it was just like, man, the stuff that I made was terrible. Okay, absolutely terrible. It was embarrassing to even bring home and say, "Hey, I made a chisel." Right? It took me 3 months to make this chisel. It's barely recognizable as a chisel. It's about 6 inches long. It has this one sort of flat edge. When you need to chisel something, you can use this. It barely was. Had I not said it was a chisel, nobody would have guessed it was a chisel. So I knew that stuff. Like I said, I didn't think it was going to be easy, but I didn't think it was going to be hard. And then the last one on the shop class, like we had a class on electricity. And it's just like, I don't think I'm going to go home and like rewire, the family room. So what am I learning in electricity class? So we made all these weird, like we were making it, I remember, and again, it took 2 months to make what was like a little buzzer, which was a little block of wood, and it had some screws and it had some contacts and then a spool, and you had to wrap wire around it. And then eventually when you sort of hooked it up to, like a little battery or something, what would it do? Guess what? It buzzed. Right. That was all it did. And I think I got a B on my buzzer too, because it took me way too long and my buzzer was a little bit, skittish and everything else. And I guess it did not have the effect. I guess my point is I did not shape my personality, it was not a turning point for me like it was for you, other than the fact that, yeah, I don't think I'm going to be an electrician or a blacksmith or a carpenter because I can't do any of this stuff. And you certainly don't want me to do any of this stuff for me,
Right.
for you. I
Yeah,
guess.
I mean, I think in a weird way it did shape me because the same thing as you. I was so bad at it that I thought to myself very quickly, well, shit, this can't be my career. I better come up with a plan B. Chris, you say that you couldn't make the buzzer work that well, that it was just an okay buzzer. How about me? Chris, I flunked napkin holder. Chris, listen to me. Napkin holder. That's all the thing was supposed to do. You just shove some napkins between two pieces of wood to see if it would hold them up. Honestly, I couldn't even make a functioning napkin holder. So that's how bad I was. My parents almost got me tested in reverse, right? Like, oh my God, is he okay? He doesn't even have basic skills to visualize things and then cut them with a saw and sand them and then glue them with Elmer's glue. Come on, man. How do you flunk that?
So what you're saying is
way.
The napkins were unfettered and flailing around, and like these napkins are not staying in place, and that's because Jeff failed in his objective to make a tight, well built napkin holder to keep that napkin in place.
I mean, it was something. When I was done, it was an actual structure of some kind. I don't know that it would be something somebody would put two and two together and say, I should put napkins over here. I don't think that's what it screamed. No, to say that I failed miserably at every single thing I did in shop class is an understatement. And don't even start me on drafting and architecture, right? The drafting class where, holy moly, my brain is not that focused. I can't dot every I and cross every T and make all my pencil points look perfect. And the T square,
Mm-hmm.
I'm already confused. You lost me at T. Maybe you lost me at square. I don't know.
Were you using a compass or any of the other cool things to sort of, make like a perfect circle or something along those lines.
And that's another thing. No sense of direction, Chris. If you handed me a compass, I wouldn't even know what to do with it or how to get where I'm supposed to go. To this day, without GPS, I mean, I would maybe never find my way back home. I am the worst. I have no natural sense of direction either. It's a miracle that I'm still alive.
And yet we used to, the only way we could get anywhere, eventually when we started driving on our own, or was looking at a map or that handy book of maps, right? The Thomas Brothers guide, right? I don't know who the hell the Thomas Brothers were, but they spent a lot of time just basically mapping out literally like a metropolitan area, right? So you had your Thomas Brothers guide for San Diego County or LA County. And then you're supposed to, I'm going to look up an address and I'm going to figure out how to get there, right? And again, it's like, I wasn't a blacksmith, right? I wasn't a carpenter, but now I'm supposed to be able to look at this map and figure out where 6871 Mewall Drive is. And I go, and I'm flipping, look in the index, and it's like Mewall Drive is on A28. So then I got to go to flip to section A, and then I got to go to subsection 28. And then I got to go, okay, let's go, right? And you're going to sit there and you're going to somehow, and again, like I said, I wasn't a carpenter, I wasn't an electrician. I wasn't Lewis or Clark. It's like, how am I supposed to use this thing? Right? I'm going to figure out how to get there. It's probably just better to come an alternative, because by the time I figure out how to get there, I don't even want to go anymore. Right? Yeah. It's just like, can we just do something else? Can we go somewhere that I already know how to get to, or somewhere I've already been?
I never went anywhere complicated back then, but for the same reason, man. You're right, Chris. You'd have to have a Thomas guide, this encyclopedia of maps inside mini maps, inside smaller maps that just kept drilling down. Back then, it was not uncommon to be constantly pulling over to the side of the road. And by the way, if you were a guy back then who had a hard time asking for directions, good luck. You're totally fucked, right? You better start learning how to ask for directions, because back then, again, no GPS, everything was word of mouth, and most people don't know how to give directions. To this day, It was no better back then, right? They wouldn't say things like make a right on Elm Street, go to the third light, and then make a right on 2nd Avenue. No, they would say go past the Chess King, right? As soon as you see the Kentucky Fried Chicken, make a right. You're going to want to go about as far as you think you can go, and then make a left on a little dirt road. Not the first dirt road, Chris. The second dirt road. There's usually a tumbleweed out in front out there. You're going to maybe see that tumbleweed. If you'll know that you've gone way too far if you get to the end of the road. Then that's too far. It's like, who is giving me these directions, right? Again, how many times did you get lost back then? Many times.
You needed landmarks, right? Because telling me that I'm going north, again, who am I? Daniel Boone? I don't know which direction north is at this point. And it's like, but go past the Picnic and Chicken and then make your first right. That I can use, right? That helps me more than the sense of like, I'm on the street and I got to, because again, like I said, you missed it and forget it. And then nothing was going to tell you. I guess the worst part is if you were doing this on your own, if nobody was helping you, maybe you missed a turn, but you didn't know you missed it until like 5 or 10 minutes. Then you're really screwed, right? Because like, all right, I got to just completely go back. And now I'm going the opposite direction. And so now all the directions have to be flipped over, right? Which again, when you were directionally challenged, like myself, like it seems like you were as well, it's just like, again, you know what? I'm just going to go home. Right. And I couldn't make it. I couldn't figure out especially
how are you going to go home though?
Well,
how are you going to go home? It's nighttime now. There's hardly as many streetlights now as back then as there are now. So you would get lost in the middle of the night. There's nobody to ask. I remember multiple times just stopping in neighborhoods, walking up to random doors, ringing doorbells every once in a while, and just going, "Hi, I'm an idiot. Can you tell me how to get to blah, blah, blah?" And almost every time they would know. It wouldn't even be like a problem. And they wouldn't expect that you were there for a home invasion.
Nobody would shoot you.
There's a couple really funny comics that do jokes about this. Back in the 70s, we all got so excited when the doorbell would ring or the door to knock at the door, right? But back then it wasn't like, who the hell are you? Get off my property. Back then it was like, oh my God, you want some directions? Look, everybody, he wants directions, so I guess not as big a deal, but yeah, getting turned around and getting lost, that was a legitimate concern back in the day. Chris, how do you think we did this episode?
Overall, I just feel like this episode to me is like really, again, feels like summer. And to me, like I said, we talked about the weather. It's warm outside. It's sunny. It's great weather for all the things we want to do in the summertime. And I think one of the things that I like to do in summer is probably something that's not going to surprise you the most, but is eat. And I think now as I look at it, I don't know, starting to feel like a burrito kind of day, at least to start off with. So I don't know. We'll go from there. So
and what better place to live in than Southern California? Because when we talk about burritos, guys, we, sorry, this is going to sound very arrogant, but we do have the best burritos here in Southern California. I don't care what you think, wherever you live. So Chris, is it going to be an epic burrito? Do you think it might even be a California burrito, dare I say, with French fries in there?
I treat myself to those very sporadically for obvious reasons. But hey, to your point though, as Muhammad Ali used to say, if you're talking about our burritos, I'm paraphrasing, I think, but it ain't bragging if it's true. And it's definitely true. So for those of you who are not, on board, next time we see you, burritos on us, and then and you can judge from there. So until next time, Jeff.
Until next time, Chris.